After the Mux nodes, what happens? We then have the action tool. Our 3D compositor was added, and both those layers out in the timeline were converted to action layers. If I double click on the action tool, we get our action parameters down here, and you can see there's many different tabs. We're going to be digging into the action tool pretty deep during this tutorial, but just to understand, you can access the action bin where you have a bunch of tools that are relative to working in 3D, because action is a 3D compositor. If I go to my media tab, you'll see each one of my layers from that timeline have been brought in as media source, and they're listed in the media list. These smaller nodes, these are representations of the layers, and you can see we have nothing fed into their mat input right now. We only have the main output of the Mux going into the main input, the front. So that's why in the media list, you see the display of Mux 36 for the name that's coming into the front for layer 1, and for the mat of layer 1, it says internal. There is no outside source being used as the mat. All right, now I want to go into the action tool. So I'm going to select it in this schematic view over on the left-hand side and hit the escape key. Now we're looking at the nodes relevant to the action tool. Let me zoom back, Control Option. There's a camera by default, and it's represented by a node. Everything inside the action tool will be represented by a node. Our footage, our main input, if you will, for the front, comes in as an image, and an axis was applied to it. If I double click on this axis, I can now start rotating this in 3D space. I can scale it down. I can manipulate that source because this axis is controlling it. Very quickly, when you are looking at the Object tab, whatever you select, those parameters will be relevant to that individual tool, whether it's the axis or it's the image. And you can rename any element in the action tool by selecting it, coming over to the Object tab right here, clicking and highlighting in the Object field. I can then come in and name this dude. So you'll notice the axis itself in the schematic changed names. It's changed its name where I just renamed it, and the tab that lets you access its parameters, the name was just changed. So now hopefully you understand the concept. We took those two layers, one of them being a ConnectFX clip, and the bottom layer, brought them into ConnectFX, told it to create the 3D composite. Let me go back to my schematic for ConnectFX. Option Escape brings you to that level. So I stepped out of the action tool, and I'm now looking at the top level. Those two layers that were out of my timeline are now layers here inside the action tool. I want to bring back my media library, so I'm going to hold the 1 key and hit my left arrow key. Now I want to import a clip into my ConnectFX schematic that was not out in my timeline. So I'm just going to pick it up, I drag it from the library, and drop it right into the ConnectFX schematic. The footage is brought in, and it's just floating here. It's not connected to anything. So I go back to my action tool. I want to bring this clip into the action tool. If we come down to the UI on the media tab, or actually on the action bin tab, either one you can access it, but I'll go to my media tab so you can see what's going to happen in the media list. You have an option that reads new media, but this is a flyout. If I click on it and hold it, I also have access to an option called new input. As soon as I choose that, you'll notice down in my media list, a new input, number 3, has been added. It reads internal for both because there's been nothing fed into it. But looking at the ConnectFX schematic, you'll see we have an extracted node that is this new internal layer. I'll click on the yellow output of this footage source, drag it to the red input of the layer, and release it. And now that is now the front source, the main input for this new layer I just created. You can see the name has been added into the media list and so on. Now what's the whole point of having these layers floating out here in ConnectFX? The main advantage of having your layers exposed or extracted, if you will, outside of the action tool is you can then use any one of the many effects nodes that are available to you inside of ConnectFX, changing the end result of this footage prior to going into action. For example, I want to create an edge effect of this clip before it goes into action. Right now we just have the raw footage going in as the main input, the front input for this layer. But if I come down to my effects nodes, these are all the ConnectFX nodes, and I hit the E key to get the edge detect tool. I'll drag that, I'll bring it out. You don't connect anything from the layer input, the floating layer input. You have to connect it to the connection line prior to the main input for the layer. So I'll hold the Option key. I drag it over the line, it highlights, I release it. I now have my original footage going into the Edge Detect tool, which then goes into the layer for the Action tool. I'll go back to my Edge Detect tool, and you can see there's lots of different options in here, but as I scrub, now I've created a stylized end result of my footage with the Edge Detection tool. Of course, if I wanted to continue, I can add blur tools, I can add color correction tools, I can add a wide variety of different tools to the input for this action layer. All right, I want to show you one more way of adding media into the action tool on a manual basis, and then we're going to show you an automatic way. I'll select my action tool. I'll hit the escape key. We'll zoom back. See, there's the new axis and the image. What's coming in is my Edge Detect. You can see that's where it reads right there. But I'll take the rest of these. I'm going to select all of them at one time in my media library. This is the action schematic right now. In fact, you know what? I'm going to switch to a 3 viewport layout to truly understand what's about to happen. So over here where it reads 2 up, I'll switch this to a 3 view. This view, I'm going to leave it at, this is perfect. I want this actually to be the ConnectFX schematic. I'll make sure I have my action tool selected in the ConnectFX schematic. I'll then activate the center viewport. I'll hit the escape key, which then brings me into the action schematic. And I'll select the last one, and we'll leave this F4, which is the output of the camera from action. I also want to just zoom back a little bit. Okay, going back over to my media library. I have 6 layers selected. I picked them up. Yes, I could drop them here into ConnectFX, which then would import them in ConnectFX. But if I drag this over to the action schematic and release them, boom. They're all imported into the action as individual layers. And of course, an axis is applied to each layer as you expect. Looking at the media list, as I scroll up and down, we can see all the different layers that were just created. But looking over here in my ConnectFX schematic, we do not see these nodes for those layers. They are not extracted yet because we drag and drop them directly into the action schematic. But that doesn't mean you can't extract them. Down in the media list, let me select media source number 4, which is the video chat for Arthur. And watch over here in ConnectFX. In fact, hold on. Let's get rid of our media library. Hold the 1 key and hit the left arrow key. So we have a little more room here. Let me zoom in so you can see what's about to happen. So there's my action tool. Once again, I've got media input 4 selected, the video chat room, right over here where it reads extract. I click that. I'll select the layer input, I'll hold the shift key, and I can drag up, which then in turn moves everything downstream from what I have selected. And you can see we were able to extract that layer so that it is accessible inside of ConnectFX. And you can do that for multiple layers at one time if you want. If I select image 5, 6, and 7 and do the same thing, click extract, you now can see all those elements have just been brought out into the schematic view. So this was a manual method of importing or bringing in media into ConnectFX or into the action tool that was not part of your edit in your timeline. And this is a very common workflow when you are experimenting or you're not sure of what media you want to use when you're building a ConnectFX or you're working in Action, the 3D compositor. You'll need to get media brought in here that is not part of your edit back in your timeline. All right, let's exit out of ConnectFX. And I'm going to bring my media library back up. I'll hold the 1 key and hit the left arrow key. I'm going to close my sequence named HUD Drag and Drop Action. And I'm going to select the sequence called HUD Sequence to 3D Comp and open that. Right click, choose Open. I'll come over to the media library. I'm going to select the first clip in the HUD folder, my desktop main screen window. I'll hold the Shift key and select the bottom media source so they're all selected. Keep in mind, with the method I'm about to show you, this drag and drop into our sequence, the order in which you select them will be the hierarchy of how they are edited into the sequence. But what I'll do is pick them all up, drag them down into the sequence. By default, they're all going to be laid into the sequence as a new layer because I'm dropping it above the other layer, but they're being laid in one after the other in the sequence. If I hold the Command key before I release it, look what it does. It stacks them all up at the drop point and creates a new layer for each one of them. So I release everything, and now if I bring my UI and change the size a little bit, I just created 7 new layers, and each one of the elements that I had selected is now an individual layer with its endpoint starting at the point of drag and drop at the current positioner. If I scrub in, I can also bring my screen down a little bit size-wise so you can see this. And now I can use the page down key and we can go through each layer was added and created inside of our sequence. I want to do some quick editing. I don't want any frames of the clips I just dragged and dropped past the point of the original media. So I'll move my current frame positioner to the tail frame of layer 1 and 2. Snap is on, so it'll just automatically snap to that tail frame. Now, if you want to create a cut in the timeline, the hotkey is Control-V. And notice the focus point is at this top layer, because the hotkey of Control-V will cut whatever is the currently focused or primary track. So I hit Control-V. Now I can just select the frames after the cut, pick it up, drag it to the bottom of the UI to throw it away. Now, if you want to create a cut across multiple tracks, you hold Control-Shift and hit V. Now you'll see we created a cut on every single track. And then I want to select all these frames past the point of the current positioner. I'll hold the Command key and just click and drag, and you see they're all highlighted. When I get to the end, I just hit the Delete key, and now I just created a clean cut for all the different elements that I dragged into my sequence. All right, I'll click the Home button to zoom back out. Now, we're going to take all of these at one time and bring them into ConnectFX, just like we did with the bottom two layers. So I'm going to select the top layer, hold the Shift key, select the bottom layer. Go back over to my Effects ribbon, make sure Selection as 3D Comp is enabled, and click Create ConnectFX. First thing I'll do is hide my media library. I don't want to see it, so I'll choose Hide from the Mode box. And I'll select the schematic view, and I'll choose Fit. And look what just happened. Same as before, Smoke gave us the grouped node of the original ConnectFX clip that was in the timeline. It brought in the footage of the woman, but then it brought in every single layer with its media source and applied the Mux node to it, and then created a layer in action for each individual layer. This is typically how I like to convert my sequence into ConnectFX when I need to bring those layers into a 3D composite. But remember, at any time, you can add more media by dragging and dropping it into the ConnectFX schematic or directly into the action schematic.